Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. Avery awoke in a daze, her mind clouded by two unsettling truths. She had no idea where she was, and her memory felt like a vast, empty void. She struggled to open her eyes, but the glaring light forced them shut once more. Instead of her sight, it was her sense of smell that offered the first clue. A sharp, antiseptic scent filled the air, unmistakably that of a hospital. This realization answered one question but left countless others swirling in her mind. With her sense of smell offering no further clarity, her hearing took over. A faint but familiar melody reached her ears. The opening theme of the 7 p.m. news. That sound was a constant in her life. Watching the evening news was a ritual she never missed, a tradition she shared with her husband. Husband. The word emerged, but his name eluded her. She grasped at fragments of memory, but they slipped away like water through her fingers. Concentrating harder, she finally unearthed it. Logan. Yes, Logan. Yet the name felt searing, as though her mind couldn't bear to hold on to it. Seeking distraction, she focused on the television. The jingle faded, replaced by the steady voice of the news anchor. Summoning her resolve, she squinted at the screen, confirming its presence before retreating into her thoughts. "We have obtained a DVD containing his statement," the anchor announced. "For legal reasons, we cannot broadcast it in its entirety, but selected excerpts will be read. Viewer discretion is advised due to sensitive content." The calm, detached tone continued. "To my beloved wife, I hope today's actions provide answers to the questions you asked 3 weeks ago. Can we move past this? And can you forgive me? My answer to both is no. To clarify the financial ramifications, I have canceled our car and medical insurance, closed all credit accounts, and transferred every cent from our joint accounts into a trust. This trust, managed by my lawyer, will benefit various charities." The statement didn't relent. Yes, this decision leaves the children without an inheritance. However, they have their education and a solid foundation to build their futures. I've written to them explaining my reasoning, including the harsh truths. I want them to see this as a lesson in valuing those they hold dear. This is my final lesson to them. Avery's breath hitched as the words became piercingly personal. "I wish I could witness how you navigate the aftermath of this. How will you explain yourself to our children, to our friends, to the community? But by now, you've realized I will not be here. To be clear, my decision is not driven by mental illness or despair. Anyone analyzing my actions will find them rational and deliberate." The statement reached its devastating climax. "The agony of discovering your wife with another man is indescribable, but to hear her tell you to leave so they can continue, that is enough to break any man." The words struck Avery like a physical blow. She could no longer deny it. The message was for her. She tried to escape the unbearable reality by delving into her memories, only to unleash vivid images of that night. Logan hadn't attended their group's monthly gathering of close friends, claiming he was working a shift at the mine. Later, she learned work had halted due to equipment failure. The group, 9 couples who shared a bond as child-free or empty nest friends, was hosted that month by Susan and Adam. Logan's sudden arrival had thrown the gathering into turmoil. He walked in and demanded to know where Avery was. Some friends were genuinely unaware, while others stammered excuses. Susan feigned ignorance, but Graham's nervous glance toward the stairs gave her away. Logan followed the unspoken cue. 3 people tried in vain to stop him as he stormed upstairs. He burst into the bedroom, finding Adam and Avery in a compromising position. Over Adam's shoulder, Avery registered Logan's presence, but remained focused on her misguided pursuit of a fleeting pleasure she'd never achieved with Adam. Only when Logan's anguish pierced the air did reality crash down around her. "Go away," she had muttered, shutting her eyes as if doing so could erase the moment. The spell was broken. Adam remained clueless until the weight of the situation struck him. Hastily, he and Avery dressed and rushed downstairs, only to find Logan gone. The memory dissolved, leaving Avery hollow. Her attention returned to the television, where Logan's statement reached its chilling conclusion. "To the media," he urged, "use this as an opportunity to educate. Highlight the long-term consequences of disrespecting those you love. If the outcome is grim enough, perhaps it will serve as a deterrent. Showcase the aftermath, not just for me, but for everyone involved." His tone darkened. "Unless she chooses the coward's way out, which I doubt. Surely she wouldn't abandon our children completely. Still, this may be a moment to rethink the concept of no-fault divorce. Data from the old and new systems should guide us toward a balanced approach that respects fairness while enforcing accountability." The screen went silent. Avery sat frozen, paralyzed by the enormity of Logan's words and the irreversible impact of his actions. The life she had known now seemed unrecognizable, its foundation shattered beyond repair. Reintroduce accountability for those who betray their partners. We've inadvertently cultivated a society where individuals who devastate their partner's love and trust face little to no consequences, or worse, receive rewards for their actions. This reality struck me when my lawyer informed me that, despite years of steadfast devotion and risking my well-being to secure a future for my family, I would be left with less than half of my life's work. A lifetime of loyalty and sacrifice was being devalued, with the rewards of my efforts handed over to a duplicitous woman. To those reading these words, I implore you, do not let misguided ideologies, pushed by certain radical groups bent on disguising the oppression of men as equality, skew your perspective. Likewise, do not be swayed by the enabling rhetoric of weak-willed, liberal-minded individuals who excuse such injustices. Lawmakers, take heed. If you allow society to continue consuming hormone-altering substances unchecked, do not act surprised when confusion about identity and roles escalates. Meanwhile, Avery's thoughts wandered again, trying to escape the pain by delving into her memories. After the party, Logan disappeared for several days, evading every attempt she and Adam made to contact him. She felt no remorse for her actions. In her mind, they were justified. While she regretted the way Logan discovered the truth, she did not see herself as culpable. When Logan finally resurfaced, she braced for the torrent of anger she expected. She was ready to endure it, believing it was the price of her choices. But what returned wasn't fury. It was a hollow, lifeless shadow of the man she once knew. The 4 days he had been gone gave her plenty of time to perfect her defense. When he confronted her, she explained that Susan's health struggles 3 years earlier had left her unable to engage intimately with Adam. Out of compassion for Adam's needs, Avery said she had reluctantly stepped in to fulfill those obligations. Her lack of enthusiasm, however, had strained their arrangement, causing Adam to pull away. Surely Logan could understand why Adam had sought comfort elsewhere, and why, as a friend, she felt compelled to help. Avery framed her betrayal as an act of kindness. By ensuring Adam's satisfaction, she argued, she had been preserving her respect for Logan. True, this arrangement occasionally meant Logan unknowingly shared leftovers, but she had been careful to avoid intimacy with him on days she'd been with Adam, ensuring his experience remained unaffected. Moreover, she had kept their affair discreet, confiding only in 3 other couples who had sworn secrecy. To her, this was a protective measure, sparing Logan from the humiliation of gossip. Her justification extended to her decision to keep the affair hidden from Logan initially. She insisted she had done so to spare him unnecessary pain, knowing his pride would prevent him from accepting the situation. By concealing it, she claimed, she had shielded him from hurt. The only part of her plan that lacked forethought was her reaction when Logan uncovered the truth. In hindsight, her abrupt dismissal of him, telling him to leave, might have seemed cold. She explained it as being overwhelmed in the moment. Surely Logan could understand. Wouldn't he have felt similarly if someone had ruined his joy in a comparable situation? Despite her explanations, Logan remained unresponsive. In what seemed like a moment of remorse, Avery asked for his forgiveness and expressed hope they could move on. To her, it was simply a matter of time. She believed everything could heal eventually. In the following weeks, she gave him space, refraining from bringing up the incident. She noticed he seemed to be returning to normal, though there was a strange emptiness in his eyes, as if something vital within him had faded. Logan began spending most of his time in the garage, absorbed in his projects. She often heard the whir of the cement mixer at odd hours, but never questioned why no fresh concrete appeared. Meanwhile, the phone rang incessantly. Friends aware of the affair called to express concern about their marriage, while others, still oblivious, sought details. Avery deftly navigated these conversations, weaving a story that Logan had always known about the arrangement, but had specifically asked her to refrain during their anniversary weekend, a request she had regrettably violated. Adam frequently asked if it was time to apologize to Logan, but Avery urged patience. With no intimacy from her husband, she sought Susan's permission to increase her visits with Adam to once a week. 3 weeks after the revelation, Avery began urging Logan to resume hosting their group's monthly gatherings. It was their turn to host, and she believed showing a sense of normalcy was vital. Initially, Logan showed no interest. However, as the party date approached, she noticed a flicker of excitement in him. This gave her hope that they were moving forward. When 2 couples declined the invitation, citing prior commitments, Avery dismissed it as coincidence, relieved that they were likely unaware of the affair. The remaining guests arrived, and the evening began without incident. As the night unfolded, though, several guests left abruptly and without explanation. The lively atmosphere grew tense, replaced by an uneasy silence. Avery observed Logan from across the room, watching as he spoke to Jenny and Frank. His expression was intense, while the couple appeared deeply uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Logan then moved on to Sandra and Bob, eliciting a similar reaction. This time, the couple's denials were more animated, the tension in the room becoming palpable. 5 minutes after their tense conversation, Sandra bid Avery goodnight, and the two quietly left. Avery stood in silence for a moment, her frustration simmering just beneath the surface. To say she was angry was an understatement. Logan's interference in her life was intolerable. Who did he think he was, meddling in her relationships? Determined to confront him, she marched straight into the kitchen. Adam, catching sight of her furious expression, abandoned her earlier warning to steer clear of Logan and followed her. "Why are you driving our friends away? Don't you see how humiliating this is for me?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. Logan's response was unsettlingly calm. His voice was steady, almost too composed. "I'm simply identifying the guilty among us, sorting the innocent from the culpable, so to speak. Adam, your presence is timely." He shifted his attention to both of them, his tone taking on a chilling formality. "Out of respect for the years we've shared as friends, I'll be honest. I'm going downstairs to retrieve my gun from the safe. When I return, I'll be using it on both of you." Without awaiting a reaction, Logan exited the room. Adam instinctively moved to stop him, but Avery grabbed his arm. "No, Adam, we need to leave. Right now." Adam's expression was incredulous. "You can't be serious. He's bluffing, trying to scare us." Avery shook her head, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You didn't see what I saw in his eyes. His green eyes were gone, Adam, replaced by something black, unnatural. He's no longer the man we knew. We created this, and now we have to run." Adam hesitated, his thoughts racing. "What about Susan?" "She'll be fine," Avery replied firmly. "We won't be." From that moment, Avery's memory became a series of broken images, fragmented like shattered glass. She remembered snippets, the flicker of the television screen in the living room, the somber anchor's voice reporting grimly, "To those who failed to warn me of my wife's betrayal, I offer my apologies. My actions should make it clear that such deceit is intolerable in any society. Perhaps with the media's help, this message will resonate for years to come." At the very least, these individuals are no longer part of the gene pool. Adam, my former friend, in 35 days, you will understand the pain I endured, losing the person you love unconditionally. To have your heart ripped apart while it still beats is a torment beyond words. Good luck explaining this to your children. They will forever blame you for their loss. Susan got off lightly, but to you, Adam, goodbye. I'll see you in hell. Avery's mind drifted as her body moved on instinct. She recalled dragging Adam out of the house, the sound of the deadbolt clicking behind them. Across the street, she glanced back to see Logan's silhouette in the window, his piercing gaze locked on her. She remembered running until the force of the explosion flung her and Adam to the ground. Despite the pain, she managed to pull Adam beneath a nearby truck, shielding them from the raining debris. Her senses flickered back and forth between reality and recollection. The news droned on in the background. Top story today: a massive explosion leveled a house in Mort Crater. 2 individuals outside the residence sustained injuries and are reported to be in stable condition. Authorities confirmed that at least 8 people were inside the home at the time and are presumed dead. The house belonged to Logan Hernandez, a miner specializing in explosives. Details are still emerging as investigations continue. The words faded as darkness reclaimed her thoughts. In her dreams, vivid fragments resurfaced. Logan's voice echoed in her memory, recounting his work with explosives. He had once explained how a simple mix of fertilizer and fuel, combined in a cement mixer, could be ignited with a detonator and booster. His casual tone then now carried a sinister weight in her mind. As consciousness slipped further away, one last horrifying image seared itself into her thoughts. She saw Logan in the window, gripping a small yellow device adorned with dangling wires. Behind him stood 7 faces, tense with apprehension. Time seemed to slow as Logan smiled, his green eyes glowing with malice. With deliberate finality, he pressed the button. 2 months later, the nation remained captivated by the tragedy. A newscaster's voice filled the air. Tonight's planned segment on Adam Lattimore, a key figure in the Hernandez-Lattimore tragedy, has been canceled due to his recent suicide. Instead, we bring you an interview with Dora Smith, the eldest daughter of one of the couples lost in the Mort Crater explosion. Additionally, we'll cover the surge in confession stories, divorces, and counseling requests that have swept the nation. The ACP reports a 3-month backlog for marriage counseling services as demand continues to climb. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating. The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. My name is Andrew, and I've always considered my life to be a good one. At 39, I live in a comfortable home and hold a small ownership stake in a construction company. While my role as a junior partner hasn't made me rich, it's provided a stable, satisfying life for my wife, Violet, and me. After 8 years of marriage, we may not have children, but our partnership has always felt solid, or so I believed. Violet has been the center of my world. She's a dreamer, someone whose love for books goes beyond reading. She collects them and even dabbles in writing short stories of her own. For years, she's spoken of a dream that blends her passions, opening a book-themed cafe, a warm and inviting place where people could enjoy coffee, homemade pastries, and the company of a great book, a space for connection, relaxation, and shared joy among book lovers. That dream took shape about a year ago. Violet discovered a picturesque location in one of the city's more upscale areas. It was a charming corner shop with big, bright windows and a cozy atmosphere that matched her vision perfectly. The rent was high and the renovations were expensive, but I reassured her that we could manage. To help her get started, I withdrew from my savings and took out a small loan. When she opened the doors to Chapters and Cream, it was as though her vision had materialized in real life. The walls were lined with bookshelves, the air smelled of fresh brewed coffee and flaky pastries, and customers immediately fell in love with the cafe. Seeing Violet thriving there, greeting visitors and chatting about their literary interests, filled me with pride. It felt like my support had helped her build something truly meaningful. But lately, things have begun to feel off. The changes came gradually. At first, Violet simply seemed distracted, her mind somewhere else even when she was sitting beside me. She began spending increasing amounts of time at the cafe, often staying late to handle one issue or another. I didn't think much of it. Running a new business is demanding. But then the little things started to pile up. She became distant, as if her affection had waned. I began noticing that she put extra effort into her appearance, choosing dresses I hadn't seen in years, and taking longer than usual to get ready before heading out. I told myself I was overthinking it. Perhaps she was just trying to make a good impression on customers, or maybe the pressures of running the cafe were weighing on her. But as weeks passed, a growing unease set in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was happening. Everything came to a head one evening. It was a Thursday, and I was lounging on the couch with coffee in hand, catching up on a game I'd missed. Violet walked in, holding a bouquet of vibrant yellow roses. The sight made me pause. "You bought flowers?" I asked, surprised. It wasn't like her to bring home flowers on a whim. She smiled softly, her cheeks slightly flushed. "No, they're not from me," she replied, setting the roses on the kitchen counter. "They're from a regular at the cafe. His name's Charles. He wanted to thank me for recommending a book." The air seemed to shift. "A recommendation?" I asked, trying to sound unaffected. "Yeah," she said lightly. "He's a big fan of historical fiction, so I suggested this Civil War novel that doesn't get much attention. He loved it, and I guess the flowers were his way of showing gratitude." Her casual tone unsettled me, but what bothered me most was the faint smile lingering on her face. "Charles," I echoed, testing the name aloud. "Have you mentioned him before?" Violet nodded as she arranged the roses in a vase. "He's been coming in regularly for a couple of months. He's just one of those people who stands out, really charismatic and interesting to talk to. He's incredibly well-read. Honestly, it's fascinating." The admiration in her voice twisted something in my gut. It wasn't a tone she used often, not even when talking about her cafe. Forcing a laugh, I asked, "Charismatic, huh? What does he do?" "He's a lawyer," she replied casually, "and an amateur historian. He's traveled a lot. You'd probably like him, Andrew." Those words stung in a way I couldn't quite explain. She turned to face me, and for the first time, I think she noticed my expression. Her smile faded slightly. "You're not upset about the flowers, are you?" she asked, stepping closer. "They're just a nice gesture. We talk about books and small things, that's all." Her words were reassuring, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Uncertainty, perhaps guilt. She squeezed my shoulder, offering a smile. "There's nothing to worry about, I promise." I forced a smile of my own and lied. "It's fine, I trust you." She kissed my cheek and moved on to another topic, but my thoughts lingered on Charles. Over the following weeks, Violet's behavior only grew more difficult to dismiss. She came home later than ever, always with a vague explanation: a broken coffee machine, an employee needing help, or getting caught up in conversation. On their own, each reason seemed harmless, but together they painted a picture I couldn't ignore. Her phone became her constant companion, buzzing frequently with messages she never explained. I stayed silent, never confronting her, but the uncertainty was eating away at me. The late nights, her distant gaze, the gnawing feeling that I was losing her. It was like watching our marriage unravel in slow motion. Then one night, when Violet came home well past midnight, mumbling another weak excuse about managing inventory, I reached my breaking point. I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. I needed answers. I never thought I'd be the kind of man who would consider hiring a private investigator. But I also never imagined I'd feel so adrift in my own marriage, doubting every word and smile from the woman I loved. At first, I thought I could handle it alone. Maybe I'd follow her after work or drop by the cafe unannounced. But my job had other plans. New contracts at the firm demanded my full attention, and as a junior partner, I couldn't afford to lose focus. Admitting I couldn't manage this on my own, I started searching for help. After some research, I found Greg Parsons, a private investigator with stellar reviews and a reputation for professionalism and discretion. His website was simple and to the point, exactly what I was looking for. With a mix of hesitation and desperation, I picked up the phone and made the call. The glowing testimonials had set my expectations high, and I clung to their promises as if they were a lifeline. The following morning, I picked up the phone and scheduled a meeting with Greg. His office was tucked away in a nondescript downtown building, so easy to miss that it might as well have been invisible unless you were specifically looking for it. Greg himself looked like a man in his mid-40s, his sharp eyes tempered by an air of quiet composure that strangely, put me at ease. His attire was a simple gray suit, nothing ostentatious, but it radiated competence and professionalism. Once I laid out my situation, Greg leaned back in his chair and scrutinized me with a calm, measured gaze. "So," he began, his tone even, "you suspect your wife might be unfaithful, but you lack definitive proof. Her recent behavior feels different and it's causing you to worry." "That's exactly it," I said, my voice heavy with frustration. "I can't confront her without evidence, but I also can't keep living in this state, always sensing something's off and never knowing the truth." Greg nodded in understanding. "You're not the first person to come to me with these doubts, Andrew. Many others have been in your shoes. Sometimes the fear turns out to be a misunderstanding." He paused, his gaze steady on mine. "And other times it doesn't. My job is to give you the clarity you need." We spent the next hour reviewing every detail, her daily habits, her sudden cafe visits, and the name Charles, which I mentioned almost absent-mindedly. Greg took careful notes, his pen gliding efficiently across a small, tidy notebook as he outlined his approach: discreet surveillance, meticulous fact-finding, and regular progress updates. "You'll have to be patient," he warned as I stood up to leave. "The truth takes time, but I promise I'll uncover it for you." As I shook his hand, a strange mix of apprehension and relief settled over me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had a plan. The following weeks crawled by at a maddening pace. I threw myself into work, desperately trying to block out the thoughts of what Greg might uncover. Whenever Violet came home late or seemed distant, I reminded myself to stay calm. Greg was on it. Then, about 3 weeks in, Violet burst through the front door one evening, brimming with uncontainable excitement. "You won't believe what happened today!" she exclaimed, her voice sparkling with energy. I set down what I was doing, bracing myself. "What is it?" "I lost my phone earlier. It must have fallen out of my bag while I was out grocery shopping. I didn't even realize it until someone called the cafe to say they'd found it. Can you imagine? Some stranger went out of their way to get it back to me." "That's pretty lucky," I said, keeping my tone neutral despite the suspicion prickling at my mind. "I know, right? I thought I'd have to replace the whole thing, but the guy just handed it back, smiled, and wouldn't even accept a reward. Can you believe it? Such a good person." Her expression radiated gratitude, but my thoughts were spinning. Could Greg have staged this? A ploy to access her phone or track where she'd been? The coincidence was too clean to ignore. I didn't press the issue, but it only made me more anxious for answers. Whatever Greg had discovered, it felt like the truth was inching closer. The call came on a Wednesday morning while I was at work, the din of construction all around me. "Andrew?" Greg's voice was steady and professional, almost detached. "I've got what you need. Can you come by today?" My pulse quickened, and the rest of the day passed in a fog. As I replayed every interaction, every quiet moment with Violet, I tried to steel myself for what I might see. But nothing could have prepared me for the reality. That evening, Greg sat across from me and pushed a slim folder toward me. "Take your time," he said softly. "We'll go through this together." I hesitated before opening it, my hands unsteady as I flipped through the contents. At first, the images appeared harmless. Violet sitting at a cafe with a man I presumed to be Charles, both of them smiling, leaning in close as though sharing an inside joke. The next photo stung. They were seated at an upscale restaurant, their hands intertwined across the table, an unmistakable intimacy that made my stomach turn. And then, I saw the picture that shattered everything. On a crowded city street, Charles's arm was wrapped around Violet's waist, and she tilted her face up to kiss him. The air seemed to rush from my lungs. I looked away, my breathing ragged. "There's more," Greg murmured. He reached for a tablet and brought up a folder of messages. I managed to access her texts. Each line on the screen felt like another blow. "Charles, I can't stop thinking about you. Violet, soon, I hope. I miss you." On and on it went, flirtatious exchanges, whispered plans to meet, and tender declarations, words that should have been meant for me. My head spun. How had I ended up here? I had given her everything, my love, my trust, the money to get her cafe up and running, and this was how she repaid me? Anger, shame, and hurt twisted together in a suffocating knot. I forced myself to blink back tears, unwilling to break down. "You okay, Andrew?" Greg's voice was gentle, his expression concerned. I swallowed hard and nodded. "Yeah, thank you. I needed this." That night I didn't sleep. I lay there staring at the ceiling, tormented by memories of Violet's laughter and her bright smile on the day the cafe opened. I couldn't reconcile that version of her with the woman in Greg's photos. By the time dawn crept through the window, my grief had hardened into determination. If she was willing to destroy our marriage for Charles, I wouldn't let her take advantage of me any longer. I made an appointment with Rachel Simmons, a formidable divorce attorney renowned for her no-nonsense approach to complex cases. "Mr. Moore," she greeted me, her voice calm and professional. "How can I assist you?" I explained everything, handing her Greg's folder. She examined the photos and messages carefully, her face giving nothing away. "You're in a strong position," she said finally. "This state doesn't assign fault for divorce, but evidence of infidelity will give you leverage in asset negotiations. We'll argue that her actions caused the breakdown of the marriage." "And the cafe?" I asked. "I invested most of the money. I can't let her walk away with everything." Rachel nodded decisively. "If you can provide proof that you were the primary financial contributor, we can fight for a larger share of the assets. Gather all the documentation you have, bank statements, receipts, anything that shows your investment." Her pragmatic approach steadied me, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control over my life. We spent countless hours analyzing our strategy, with the focus on minimizing Violet's potential claims while safeguarding the assets I had worked so relentlessly to build. As the meeting drew to a close, Rachel studied me with a quiet intensity. "Andrew," she said gently, "this isn't easy, but it's the right decision. You owe it to yourself to move forward." I nodded, her words lingering in my mind as I left. On the drive home, I was consumed by a complicated mix of grief and determination. The road ahead was bound to be turbulent, but I knew I was ready for it. Violet had made her choices, and it was time for me to make mine. The following weeks felt like living in an alternate reality. I wore the mask of normalcy, smiling when necessary, sitting through dinners with her, and enduring her affectionate gestures as though nothing had shifted. To Violet, life carried on seamlessly. But inside, I was unraveling, pulling apart the pieces of our history and asking myself how it had all led to this. Behind the scenes, the wheels were turning. Rachel and I worked in tandem, compiling financial records, organizing evidence, and preparing the divorce papers. I spent hours agonizing over decisions, even about Violet's cafe. Eventually, I chose to let her keep it. Without my support, I doubted it would last, and I wanted to make a clean exit. When Rachel finally handed me the completed papers, an unexpected calm washed over me. She offered to deliver them herself, but I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "This is something I need to do." That evening, I sat in the living room, the folder heavy on the coffee table, waiting for Violet to come home. When she arrived, her face lit up, brighter than I'd seen in weeks. "Hey," she said cheerfully, placing her bag down and walking toward me. "You look so serious. What's going on?" I straightened up, my voice measured. "I've been waiting for you. We need to talk." Her smile faltered, a shadow of unease crossing her expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, sitting next to me and resting her hand softly on mine. "Andrew," she said in a tender tone, "I've been thinking of expanding the cafe. New features, bigger plans. I hate to ask, but I need your help. It could change everything." Her words hit me like a blow. Even now, after everything, she was asking for more. "Violet," I replied evenly, maintaining my composure. "There won't be any more money. In fact, I have something for you." I picked up the folder and handed it to her. She frowned, opening it to glance at the contents. I watched as the reality hit her, the blood draining from her face. "Andrew," she whispered, her voice faint. "What is this?" "It's exactly what it looks like," I said. "I'm filing for divorce." She froze, staring at me as though she couldn't process the words. Then she shook her head, her voice breaking with disbelief. "Divorce? Why? What are you even talking about? What did I do?" I met her shocked gaze and took a steady breath. "Violet, I can't pretend anymore. Something's been wrong for a while. You've been distant. Your actions don't add up. I feel like you're being unfaithful." Her face turned pale, her voice shaking. "Cheating?" she breathed. "How can you think that? Andrew, I would never. You're wrong. You have to believe me." She clutched the folder close to her chest as if to shield herself from its contents. "This doesn't make sense," she pleaded, tears forming in her eyes. "You're my husband. We can fix this. We still love each other." I stood, creating distance between us. "I loved you, Violet," I said calmly. "But I can't keep carrying this alone. I've made my decision." Her tears escalated into sobs, her voice rising with desperation. "You're ending everything over a suspicion? You don't even have proof, Andrew. This is insane." Without another word, I turned and walked toward the bedroom. Her cries echoed behind me, raw and anguished, but I didn't look back. My chest ached with the weight of it all, but my resolve held firm. I closed the door behind me, exhaling deeply. This wasn't how I ever envisioned our marriage ending, but it had to be done. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it. The courtroom was sterile and unyielding, its harsh lighting casting stark shadows on the walls. Observers sat quietly on worn benches, and legal teams murmured amongst themselves. Across the room, Violet sat stiffly at her table, her face flickering between despair and defiance. Her eyes sought mine repeatedly, as though hoping to find a trace of the man she knew, a chance to turn things around. I stared ahead, keeping my face expressionless. The judge, an older woman with a commanding presence, brought the room to order. Violet's lawyer spoke first, portraying her as a devoted wife blindsided by my actions. When Violet took the stand, her voice trembled. "Your Honor," she began, her eyes darting between the judge and me. "I love my husband. I don't know why he's doing this. He's pushed me away, but I think he's going through something. I'm just asking for time. We've been married for 8 years. That doesn't just disappear." For a brief moment, guilt gripped me, but Rachel's clear, steady voice cut through the silence. "Your Honor, while my client respects the years shared with Mrs. Moore, the marriage has been irrevocably damaged. The evidence will show Mrs. Moore's infidelity." The first images appeared, Violet and Charles at the cafe, seemingly innocent. Then came the pictures from the restaurant, the two of them close, hands entwined across the table. Her lawyer sprang to object. "Your Honor, this is circumstantial. Mrs. Moore interacts with many clients. This individual, Charles, is no different. These images prove nothing inappropriate." The judge acknowledged the objection but allowed Rachel to proceed. Then Rachel presented the final image, Violet and Charles on a crowded street, their lips pressed together in an unmistakable kiss. A ripple of quiet shock passed through the room. The judge's voice was sharp. "Mrs. Moore, would you like to explain this?" Violet hesitated, her composure fracturing as she stammered. It's not what it looks like. Charles he's just a friend, a client, someone I talk to." We had fallen into a moment that was fleeting yet devastating, a moment that, contrary to what she claimed, was not without consequence. Beneath the table, my fists clenched, frustration simmering as Violet tried to dismiss months of betrayal as if they were nothing. Rachel remained steady, her tone unshaken, as she revealed message after message. There was no ambiguity, no space for excuses. Every secret meeting, affectionate word, and carefully laid plan was now exposed for all to see. By the time Rachel finished, the cracks in Violet's facade were impossible to miss. Her expression was pale, her earlier confidence entirely eroded. The judge regarded her with a firm, measured look, one that carried both disappointment and a hint of sympathy. "Mrs. Moore," she began, her voice even but resolute, "this evidence is irrefutable. Your actions clearly meet the legal definition of infidelity." From there, the proceedings turned practical, focusing on the division of assets. It was here that my preparation proved its worth. Rachel methodically detailed the financial contributions I had made to our marriage, the steps I had taken to secure my investments, and my decision to relinquish ownership of the cafe. Mr. Moore understands that the cafe is his wife's passion, Rachel explained calmly. Despite his substantial role in establishing it, he does not wish to claim it. The judge nodded in approval, and for a fleeting moment, I caught the shock on Violet's face. She hadn't anticipated such a gesture. However, when Rachel proposed selling the house and splitting the proceeds, Violet's expression shifted. The house was the one thing she truly wanted to keep, but Rachel laid out the financial impossibility of her doing so. Ultimately, the judge ruled in my favor across the board. When it was finally over, I knew I had safeguarded what mattered most. My assets were secure, the house was set to be sold, and Violet retained the cafe. In the days that followed, Violet's attempts to contact me became relentless. She called, left messages, and even appeared at my office unannounced. Her desperation was palpable. One evening, after days of ignoring her, I finally answered the phone. "Andrew," she began, her voice trembling with emotion. "I made a mistake. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. Please, let's start over." But reconciliation was impossible. Trust, the very foundation of any relationship, was irreparably shattered. "I can't trust you, Violet," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "You lied to me for months. You can't just erase that and expect everything to go back to how it was." Her pleas dissolved into tears, but my decision was final. The trial had ended our story, and I wasn't about to rewrite it. The process of selling the house was painful. It had been the cornerstone of our marriage for 8 years, a place where we had once shared joy, love, and the illusion of happiness. Yet as I signed the papers and watched Violet receive her share of the proceeds, I felt an unexpected sense of closure. The house was no longer a home. It had become nothing more than a symbol of an ending. Predictably, Violet used her share of the money to pour back into the cafe. She expanded the menu, hired additional staff, and made every effort to revive her dream. For a while, it seemed to work. On mornings when I drove by, I'd see customers bustling in and out, and despite everything, I silently hoped she might succeed. But the success was short-lived. It wasn't long before cracks began to show. Without my financial support, Violet struggled to keep the business afloat. She resorted to loans to cover mounting expenses, but it was a losing battle. Customers began to complain about slow service, inconsistent quality, and the lack of Violet's once vibrant presence. By then, Charles had vanished from her life. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned the truth. He'd been married with children all along. His affair with Violet had shattered his own family, leading to a messy fallout. Desperate to repair his marriage, he severed all ties with Violet, leaving her alone to deal with the fallout of her decisions. She had wagered everything, her marriage, her stability, and even her future, on him, and she lost. I thought I would feel some sense of vindication, but instead, all I felt was pity. Watching her unravel wasn't satisfying. It only served as a reminder of how fragile everything we build can be. As for me, I chose to start over. I rented a small apartment closer to the city, threw myself into my work, and reconnected with friends I had neglected for far too long. At first, being alone felt foreign, as though I had forgotten how to exist without someone beside me. But slowly, I began to adapt. I didn't rush into anything new. The wounds from my marriage were still raw, and I needed time to rediscover myself outside the role of Violet's husband. I embraced a simpler, quieter kind of life, one focused on my own well-being. Weekends became an opportunity to escape into nature, with hiking trails replacing arguments and tension. Bit by bit, I rebuilt my life on my own terms. Life moves forward, and so did I. Perhaps one day, I'll meet someone who values trust and loyalty the way I do. But for now, I'm content. The scars of my marriage serve as a quiet reminder of the lessons I've learned, and the peace I've found assures me that I made the right decision. Sometimes, the end of one story is merely the beginning of another. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel. Greetings, my dear viewer. You're on the channel The Price of Cheating, The channel is for those who appreciate traditional family values and condemn adultery. So be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. I still vividly remember the moment she first brought it up. We were in the kitchen. Stella, my wife of 10 years, stood at the counter, meticulously chopping carrots for dinner as I lazily scrolled through my phone. "Kevin," she began, her tone adopting that measured gentleness she always used when trying to sway me. "The girls are talking about going on a cruise." I glanced up, startled. "A cruise? Really?" "Yes," she said with a nod. "Just a short one, a week in the Caribbean. Mandy, Liz, and a few others. It sounds like a great time. Sunny skies, sandy beaches, fruity cocktails, just a little getaway." I raised an eyebrow, unconvinced. "But you've always hated boats." She dismissed my objection with a casual wave of her knife. "That's only because I've never been on the right kind of boat. These cruise ships are like floating luxury resorts. Mandy showed me pictures, pools, spas, even casinos, nothing like the tiny boats I've been on before." I wasn't entirely convinced, but I also knew Stella had been under immense stress lately. Her marketing job had been demanding, and her once cheerful demeanor had grown sharper, our conversations shorter. Maybe this was exactly what she needed to unwind. "All right," I finally said, relenting. "If you think it'll help you relax, go for it." Her face lit up, her hazel eyes sparkling like fairy lights. "You're amazing," she said, leaning in to kiss me. The week she was away unfolded without much incident. I kept busy with work, stuck to my gym routine, and tried to ignore the fact that while she lounged on tropical beaches, I was stuck dealing with leaky faucets and a neighbor's unruly dog tearing up our lawn. She called a few times, but the conversations were brief. "How's the trip?" I asked during one of our chats. "Amazing. We just left St. Thomas. Kevin, the water here is the most vibrant blue I've ever seen. You'd love it." "Glad to hear you're enjoying it," I said. "I miss you." "Miss you too," she replied, though her voice carried an unfamiliar strain I couldn't quite place. Before I could ask about it, she added, "Anyway, I've got to run. The girls are waiting for me." "All right, have fun," I said, brushing off the unease. When she came back, something seemed off. "Hey," I greeted her as she stepped through the door. I pulled her into a hug, but she hesitated before leaning into it. Her suitcase was worn, and she carried the faint scent of sunscreen and the sea. "Hey," she said, her voice unusually subdued. "How was the trip?" I asked, stepping back to get a better look at her. "It was good. Very relaxing," she replied, but her eyes didn't meet mine. For the first time in years, I felt a faint ripple of suspicion creep over me. In the days that followed, Stella seemed distant. She didn't laugh at my jokes like she used to and spent an increasing amount of time glued to her phone, her face expressionless whenever I entered the room. At first, I chalked it up to post-vacation blues, but then her behavior shifted even more. Stella, who rarely went out more than once or twice a week, suddenly started going out almost every night. "Mandy and I are grabbing drinks," she'd say casually, or, "Liz had a tough day, so we're meeting up to talk." At first, I tried to be understanding, but after the fourth or fifth night in a row, I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling in my gut. "Out again?" I asked one evening as she slipped on her heels. "You've been seeing a lot of the girls lately." She shrugged, her eyes avoiding mine. "It's nothing. We're just catching up." "Catching up?" I repeated, disbelief creeping into my voice. "You were with them for an entire week on the cruise." Her head shot up, and her expression hardened. "Why are you making such a big deal out of this? I'm just spending time with my friends. You can't control me." "I'm not trying to control you," I said evenly. "It just feels different." She didn't reply. Instead, she grabbed her purse, threw me a sharp look, and left without another word. Something about it didn't sit right, but I pushed the thought aside. Maybe I was just imagining things. Then one evening, I saw the text. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter while she was upstairs. I wasn't snooping, honestly I wasn't, but the screen lit up, and a name caught my eye. Andrew. The message read, "Thinking about you, wish I was there." A cold knot formed in my stomach. When Stella came downstairs, I was seated at the table, her phone in front of me. "Who's Andrew?" I asked, my voice steady but icy. Her eyes widened, her face instantly draining of color as though she'd been caught in the act. "What?" "Andrew," I repeated, holding up the phone. "He says he's thinking about you. Care to explain?" She swallowed, clearly flustered. "He's just someone I met on the cruise." "Just someone?" I stood, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "Stella, what's going on?" "It's not what you think!" she exclaimed, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He was one of the bartenders. We only talked a couple of times, that's it." My chest tightened as I stared at her. "And he's texting you this because—" "I don't know," she snapped, her voice defensive. "I didn't ask him to. I haven't even replied." "That's not the issue," I said, my voice rising. "You're hiding something, I can feel it." Her arms crossed, her jaw setting in defiance. "You're being ridiculous, Kevin." "Am I?" I shot back. "Because right now it feels like you're lying to me." Her lips pressed into a firm, resolute line as she turned away from me without a word. "I'm going to bed," she announced briskly, her tone sharp and final. Left alone in the oppressive quiet, I sat motionless, the weight of her words lingering in the air. "Thinking about you. Wish I was there." An unease settled in my chest, a heavy sensation that something indefinable had shifted between us. The sense that Stella was slowly drifting away from me was impossible to ignore. In the days that followed, I found myself watching her more closely, scrutinizing her every move. I noticed how her eyes stayed glued to her phone whenever she thought I wasn't paying attention, and how her responses to my attempts at conversation had grown increasingly terse. Each exchange seemed to carry an unspoken tension, pieces of a puzzle I was afraid to assemble. 2 days later, as I arrived home from work, I noticed our neighbor Nick standing in his yard, his gaze fixed on me with an expression that immediately set me on edge. "Hey, Kevin," he called out as I stepped out of the car. "Got a minute? I need to tell you something." I forced myself to keep my voice even. "What's up?" I asked, though my stomach was already twisting into knots. Nick hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. "There was a guy at your place today," he said, his tone uncertain yet deliberate. I froze mid-step, my breath catching. "A guy? What are you talking about?" "He showed up around noon," Nick continued, his voice steady but hesitant. "Stayed for a couple of hours. It didn't seem right, you know? You don't usually have visitors when you're not home." My pulse quickened. "What did he look like?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Nick shrugged. "Tall, dark hair, about your height. I didn't get a good look, but I thought you should know." His words hit like a sledgehammer. Someone had been in my home, a stranger, during the hours I wasn't there. My mind raced to make sense of it, and a chilling suspicion began to take root. "Are you sure about the time?" I pressed. "Yeah," Nick replied firmly. "He was there for at least 2 hours." Each step toward the house felt heavier than the last, as though Nick's revelation had become a physical weight on my shoulders. My thoughts spiraled uncontrollably. Could Stella be seeing someone else? Was she bringing another man into our home while I was away? That night, the gnawing feeling wouldn't let go. I knew I couldn't sit idly by, waiting for answers to present themselves. If Stella was involved with someone else, I needed proof. I had to see it with my own eyes. The next day, Stella mentioned plans to meet her friends, and I saw my chance. While she was gone, I spent the afternoon meticulously setting up hidden cameras throughout the house. One went in the living room, another by the front door, and a few more were discreetly placed, including one in the bedroom. I ensured they were all well concealed, virtually impossible to detect. The following evening, I came home from work with a tight knot of anxiety in my stomach. Trying to appear normal, I went through the motions, but my nerves were frayed. I couldn't wait any longer. Grabbing my phone, I pulled up the footage from the cameras. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Hours of video showed a perfectly mundane house. But as I skipped ahead, my worst fears were confirmed. A man, tall, dark-haired, just as Nick had described, entered my home. My chest tightened as I watched him step inside. Stella greeted him warmly, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in months. The embrace they shared quickly turned into a kiss, familiar, unguarded, and intimate. It was clear they had done this before. My stomach dropped as the undeniable truth sank in. The camera in the hallway caught them walking hand in hand toward the bedroom, their voices faint but affectionate. I watched as they disappeared behind the bedroom door, which shut with a soft, deliberate click. The sight left me reeling, my hands trembling as I paused the footage. The betrayal was excruciating. That night, after Stella had fallen asleep, I picked up her phone from the counter. My hands shook as I scrolled through it, but she always left it unlocked. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for, a string of messages from a contact named Andrew. The texts told a story I couldn't deny. Andrew was the bartender she'd met on the cruise, a connection that now made sense. Their exchanges were filled with flirtation and plans made while I was at work. Stella's excitement was palpable in her words. Each revelation felt like another blow. She hadn't been spending nights out with friends. She'd been with him. Photos of their time together on the cruise surfaced in their chat, as well as messages filled with inside jokes and affectionate exchanges. Every word I read dismantled the life I thought we had built. But one message stood out. Andrew planned to visit again in 2 days. They had set a time, noon, while I would be at work. The pain was unbearable, but as I stared at her phone, anger took its place. Stella had made her choice, and I couldn't ignore it. Revenge began to form in my mind, an icy resolve that overtook the pain. If she thought she could deceive me, she was about to learn otherwise. He entered my home once more just as he had before, and I wasn't there to stop him. That's when the idea struck me. The following morning, I contacted Stella's parents. I told them I had planned a special surprise for her and wanted to fly them in to be part of it. They were thrilled by the suggestion of visiting their daughter, completely unaware of my true intentions. My aim was for them to witness the truth, to see Stella's betrayal with their own eyes. I wanted them to catch her and Andrew together, in my house, in our bed. When the day arrived, I told Stella I would be working late, though I had taken the day off to set my plan in motion. As soon as I left, I headed straight to the airport to await her parents' arrival. After picking them up, I checked the cameras installed in the house. As I had expected, Andrew was already there, entering with a casual ease that suggested he felt at home. He had arrived earlier than I anticipated. My pulse quickened as I brought Stella's parents back to the house. Every passing moment made my chest tighten. The moment of truth was near. When we stepped inside, faint sounds drifted from the bedroom, muffled voices, the rustling of sheets, and unmistakable moans. I motioned for her parents to remain quiet, and together we moved down the hallway in silence. With a single motion, I flung open the bedroom door. There they were, Stella and Andrew, tangled together in bed, completely exposed. The room plunged into silence, the weight of the discovery suffocating everyone. Stella's parents froze in place, their expressions blank with shock. Neither moved nor spoke. Their disbelief rendered them motionless. Fury coursed through me. "What the hell is going on here?" I yelled. Stella's face twisted with horror as her eyes met mine. She scrambled to cover herself, but the damage was already done. Andrew, caught entirely off guard, snatched up his clothes and fled without saying a word. Stella's parents stood rooted in place, their faces a painful mix of anger, heartbreak, and devastation. Finally, her father broke the silence, his voice trembling with disbelief. "How could you? Here? In his house? With another man?" Her mother's voice rose, sharp and quivering. "You've destroyed everything. Everything we taught you. Everything we believed in." She fixed Stella with a tear-filled gaze. "You've broken this family." Stella, overwhelmed by the weight of her actions, began to sob. Her words faltered as she tried to speak, dissolving into incoherent gasps. "I'm sorry," she managed to whisper, her voice frail and desperate. But her apologies were hollow, powerless against the reality of what she had done. My anger surged. "This is what you've been doing behind my back? Lying to me? Sleeping with him in our home?" My voice cracked under the strain of my rage. "I trusted you and you made a fool of me." Her father shook his head slowly, his expression hardened with disappointment. "You're not the daughter we raised," he said bitterly. His voice carried a heavy sorrow that cut deeper than anger. Her mother stepped forward, her tone cold and unforgiving. "We don't want to see you again, Stella. Not after this. You've destroyed everything. We taught you better than this." Stella's legs buckled beneath her, and she collapsed onto the floor, her sobs turning frantic. But no apology, no plea, could undo the damage she had caused. Her mother's next words were ice cold and final. "You've hurt us in ways we can't forgive. Don't reach out to us again." Her parents turned away, their grief and fury etched deeply into their faces. Her father didn't glance back, muttering under his breath, "I can't believe what you've become. Goodbye." Once they were gone, I steadied myself and spoke, my tone firm and unyielding. "It's over, Stella. I'm filing for divorce. You've destroyed everything we built. There's no coming back from this." Her tear-streaked face crumpled as she reached out to me. "Please, I'm sorry. I'll fix it. I promise," she cried, her voice cracking with desperation. But I shook my head, unmoved. "You should have thought of that before you betrayed me," I said. Without another word, I turned and walked away, her sobs echoing in the background. Later that evening, I dropped her parents off at a nearby hotel. They would be flying home the next day. Our goodbyes were brief, weighed down by unspoken pain. Afterward, I returned to the house and told Stella to leave. She didn't argue, packing a bag and heading to her friend Mandy's place. The following day, I filed for divorce. The legal process was straightforward, but the emotional toll was immense. Stella didn't contest the papers. She knew as well as I did that there was no salvaging what we once had. Her betrayal had created an irreparable chasm between us. It was over. It was time to move forward. This concludes the story. If you like it, then put your powerful like and subscribe to the channel.